So we've all heard that the trick to having a consistent club face is to have a wide golf swing. So I think a lot of us have went about trying to add width to our golf swing, but I think a question that often goes overlooked is, where does the width go in the golf swing? Is it go on both sides? Does it go on one side exclusively? But more importantly, where do we want to add width to our golf swing to gain better control of the club face? That's what we're going to look at next. I think one of the hardest things about width is understanding what is getting wider and what are we talking about when we talk about adding width. Are we talking about moving the hands more away from us? Are we talking about moving the club head more away from us? So I think we need to be very, very clear in what we're talking about when it comes to width. So I think we all kind of understand more or less that as the golf club moves around the body, it tends to make an ellipse. And if it's making an ellipse, we're more or less kind of making a circle. So I know it's not an exact circle, so please don't kill me in the comment section. I know it's an ellipse, but for this reference and to keep it simple, we're going to talk about how width really affects where low point happens, and that's why we have to consider where we add the width in the golf swing. So when it comes to width, what are people actually defining? Are they talking about how the club head moves away? Are they talking about how the hands move away? Are they talking about how the hands come through? It's very obscure when people talk about width, and we need to keep in mind that the circle or the ellipse that we make during the golf swing has a low point that's very, very important when it comes to hitting a golf ball. So when it comes to width, I think the easiest thing to do is to start with a definition of width. And the easiest way to think about this is if we kind of think more in a circle kind of way. Okay, now I know it's not a perfect ellipse, but like I said, where our green hula hoop or the golf club traveling around the body, okay, where that green hula hoop touches the ground is the low point of that arc. And if we think about width, if I was to make this side of the circle way wider, that would probably move low point more back. Just like if I tried to add more width on this side, I would tend to want to move low point more forward. So I have to kind of understand what we're talking about when it comes to width and what tends to sacrifice that width. So we've done a video in the past talking about arc width and how that really affects us when we're chipping and pitching the golf ball. So what we want to talk about here is that arc width and where it goes. So when we talk about width, one of the biggest things I think people lose sight of is we don't want to try to move the hands more away from the body, because as I do that, what we can see from the down the line camera is that my hands really start moving away from my body, and that really creates its own set of problems. So I feel as the player like I'm very, very wide here, but I'm going to have a very difficult time getting back to the ball and moving low point forward so I can deliver the club with the appropriate amount of loft. So it becomes critically important that we understand that we're not necessarily trying to move the hands away. Rather, we're trying to make sure that the club head is as far away from us as possible without losing its depth and width due to unnecessary wrist hinge. And that is one of the biggest things that tends to kill the width in the golf swing. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at why so many people tend to lose the width that they would naturally create if they didn't use too much wrist angle. So this next part is definitely for my friends who want to add some width. And when we talk about our friends that want to add some width, what we tend to see is that they tend to not really rotate the body very much at all. And what they tend to do is they tend to really use their wrist, and they tend to kind of want to pick the club up more vertically, and they tend to get a little more across the line, or they tend to get a little short. Okay, so what we see though is a lot of radial deviation in the wrist. So the thing that's so interesting is from the face on camera where you're looking right now, what we can see is that as I apply vertical wrist hinge or radial deviation, we can see that the club head starts going up as the hands go down. So if I didn't apply those same wrist angles and I move the club more back, you can see how the club head actually gets wider away from me than when I apply the excessive radial deviation. So when I get a lot of radial deviation and I get my wrist cupped at the top, which we can see from the down the line camera, what tends to happen is I have to try to straighten all that out again. And now all of a sudden I have lots of problems when it comes to trying to deliver the golf club. So for us that have a lot of problem with width, the width tends to really get ate up with the lack of mobility of the body rotating and more wrist hinge and less rotation, which tends to get us across the line or tends to get us short because we're aware of across the line and we're trying to stop that as well. So now that we've talked about where a lot of people get into issues when it comes to width and using excessive radial deviation with the wrist, what are some things we can do to try to maybe add some width if we fall into that category and tend to use a lot of wrist during the backswing and downswing? Well, what we can do is we can do a pretty simple little swing, and this might be a little difficult at first for a lot of people because most people, when I tell them just to fold their arms, they always want to give me a lot of wrist angles. So like I said, our people that tend to get in trouble with this tend to be our folks who radial deviate the wrist a lot. So what we want to do is we want to get the hands, not the club, we want to get the hands as close to the trail shoulder as possible, and we want that right arm to completely fold. Okay, that's what we want to try to feel here, just like that. So we're really feeling a little bit more fold here, okay? And what that's doing is that's taking the radial deviation out of the wrist, and now instead of using the wrist to make the club head go up, now we're using the elbow and the shoulder. So what we want to do here is we want to go ahead and kind of blend that, right? So we're obviously not going to make that golf swing because that obviously kills the width too. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to keep the wrist angles out of it, and we're just going to rotate the club to the top. And we can see if I stop that about halfway back, I've got my club nice and wide. It's really away from me, the club head, and my hands haven't really moved any farther from me or from my middle as I've moved around the body. So I'm not trying to extend and push the club to make width per se. Rather, I'm trying to kind of move my arms with my body and maintain my width that way, versus getting my wrist going early, which kills my body movement and makes my arms lift and want to go across the line. So by simply taking out the radial deviation in our wrist and making some practice swings, we can extend that from here a little bit. I haven't really tried to move it away from me. I've just let my arms straighten a bit. And now I've got all the width with my hands. I've got all my width with my club head. And now more importantly, I have time in the downswing to accelerate the club before needing to release it and to finish. And that's really going to help a lot of our folks out there who struggle with losing the width in the golf swing. So hopefully now you have a little better understanding of width and how we try to maintain the width more so than lose the width. So I don't think we actually want to quote unquote try to add width if we already have good width. However, if we're somebody who battles excessive radial deviation, then I think we definitely can go about trying to restore the width that we would naturally have if we weren't adding the unnecessary wrist angles. So we hope this is helpful. If you have questions about this, please let us know in the comments section. We'll do our best to get you an answer as soon as possible. And if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to this channel, as that also really helps our endeavors as well. So thanks so much, and until next time, keep grinding.